free world against the Soviet Union, if you like. Ideas particularly based on human rights, on individual liberty, which most countries in the world signed up to, but about half the world really embraced after the Second World War. And then we have a second set of ideas, really, which Peter brought in, about whether this is a battle of ideas, a newer or different battle of ideas between conservatism and liberalism, one in which the US, under its current administration, says we are absolutely a country of values. The challenge thrown down by Marco Rubio this morning, saying we're with you provided you're with us according to these values which we espouse. And I'd like to get back to the panel and just see again, we had a sort of a degree of international conference agreement, first round, if I can put it that way, until we got into the second half of this. I'd just like to hear again from the panel whether you think that the US, under its current administration, is making a new difference, is making a new rift, or whether it's articulating a rift that was always there within the issue of the West. Go on, please. Gladden.
After the end of the Cold War, I think what happened is that there were certain commitments of a more progressive nature that were brought into the victorious system. And although there were many different aspects of the post-war rule of law system that worked, eventually these got steadily skewed in a certain direction. And it's not just a left-right thing, it's also about where those decisions were made, less and less in national governments speaking for their citizens, and more in transnational bodies or transcontinental bodies even. And so those two things led to a distortion. But one thing that really happened is that conservative voices who were criticizing this were basically excluded from elite institutions. They were not participants in many of these debates. What's happened as a result, I think this is an opinion broadly shared by the more conservative and nationally oriented parties on both sides of the Atlantic, is that set of commitments wore down fundamental strengths of the West. The family was worn down, borders were worn down, industrial strength was worn down, and that injures our ability even to maintain the commitments that we all made in the NATO treaty. All
right, so thanks for saying that. So you're echoing a bit of what Peter was saying about this being a battle between conservatism and liberalism.
And on the where decisions are.
What would you say to those who say, look, this is a battle about the rule of international law, about the rule of law, and the US administration, in expressing a desire to take over Greenland, Canada even, is breaking those norms? This is a completely different battle from the one you described.
I think that what the US is doing right now is realizing that things went terribly wrong. Catastrophically wrong decisions were made in the 1990s and early 2000s. And under this administration, the US is attempting to address those and to restore its sources of strength.
You're talking about, say, things like immigration and so on, which the Secretary of State was talking about this morning.
That's right, that's right. And of course, one interesting thing that's happened is now everyone is saying that the rules-based international order had been underwritten by a form of power. Just because you're interested in making yourself strong doesn't mean that you reject all ideas of international norms and agreements, but we have to recognize that the rules won't enforce themselves. The rules are only enforced when strong countries
are parties. I'm not trying to boil it down to one example, but to take the most colorful example of the past year in some sense, do you think the US's aspiration, the Donald Trump's aspiration to take over Greenland, is justified?
Well, I'm not speaking for the Trump administration.
No, but you are speaking for a version of what you say conservative arguments are arguing for.
Well, I think the perspective that's underlying the direction of the Trump administration there is that the U.S. was committed to many things that were separate from its core national interests, and even dragging it down, all the while missing things that were happening in its own backyard. Why did they start talking about the Gulf of America at the beginning, or the Panama Canal? and then later Greenland, because bad things were happening right in the neighborhood, right under their nose. And if you can't identify those and restore your strength there, we can have another discussion about, you know, what international laws were implicated in each step of these like moves and
we can come on to this, but
that's I think a separate thing, because President Trump moves in unique ways.
He does. Can we? Because we're not. But thank you very much for that, Radek. Your expressions were something beyond that I can summarize.
Because I think it's a complete falsehood to claim that mass migration was a left-wing project. It was for decades supported by Republican businessmen who wanted cheap labor from Latin America in the United States.
He's right. I agree.
Right. Also, it's complete falsehood to say that.
What about migration in Europe then?
Yeah,
same. Wanting economic growth by virtue of migration.
We are an EPP government in Poland. We've built a big and beautiful fence on our border with Belarus in 2 years, and it's completely effective. It's not a left-wing or right-wing issue. It's about we agree that we have the right to control who comes in and who doesn't, but it's not inherently a left-wing or right-wing idea. You know, you can have open borders like in Australia and the United States in the 19th century, or you can have welfare state. You can't have both at the same time because you end up with a disaster. Also, it's completely false to say this was a hint about how supposedly the European Union is undemocratic. False. I was a member of the European Parliament. I was democratically elected. It's a completely democratic chamber. The European Commission is nominated by democratically elected governments of Europe. And
will you forgive me? What is the point you're making?
The point I'm making is that there are other forms of democracy than a national state democracy. We have constructed a democratically governed European Union, and this myth that gave us Brexit, that somehow Brussels bureaucrats are imposing directives on member states, is complete nonsense. That's not how the European Union works.
We might come on, though, to Ukraine in a moment, because that seems to me where one of the rifts in the West is most tested. But Secretary Clinton.
Well, as perhaps one of the few people who has actually been around since the end of the Second World War, let me add my version of history to the revisionism that I hear in not just this conversation, but so many other places. It is, for me, a blessing that freedom was expanded to include, in the United States, for example, the right of black people to be treated at least better than they had been for 400 or so years. It was a culmination of freedom for women to be given their rights much more fully than they had been. It was, I think, a dramatic recognition of human dignity for gay people to be able to be treated without fear and even marry, which to me is creating a family. So, you know, I understand conservative impulses. I understand we are fighting an ideological battle that is as old as time. There are those of us who are more comfortable in a more open, tolerant world. And there are those who have their concerns about it because they worry about the impact on existing institutions like the family, community, and others. So this really, yes, migration has been a huge flashpoint. More people were deported under my husband and Barack Obama without killing American citizens and without putting children into detention camps than were in the first Trump term or this first year of Trump's second term. So I think it's important to look at the facts, because very often the ideological impulse to try to protect the status quo or return making America great again in some nostalgic past that existed for white men and capitalist enterprise was not exactly open and welcoming to people who look like me and a lot of other people who are part of our national fabric. I have no argument with the necessity of trying to figure out how do we form families. I'm very proud of my family. I'm proud of my 3 grandchildren. I am proud to be part of that tradition. That doesn't mean everybody has to be. That doesn't mean everyone who doesn't have children is somehow an illegitimate human being. So how do we make the case in a positive way, not a bullying and very shameful way? So this debate that's going on is driven by an effort to control people, to control who we are, how we look, who we love, and I think we need to call it for what it is.
Secretary
There is a
Clinton.
legitimate reason to have a debate about things like migration. It went too far, it's been disruptive and destabilizing, and it needs to be fixed in a humane way with secure borders that don't torture and kill people, and how we're going to have a strong family structure, because it is at the base of civilization.
Secretary Clinton, so thank you for that. And you got.
You really mean that?
Yes, I do. I do, and you got several rounds of applause there. But I'm really interested in the line that our discussion is having already, which is a battle within the West between conservatism and liberalism. But I don't think we would be having this discussion at all if it weren't for some of the positions the US administration has taken. And let me take one of them, which is Ukraine, which is obviously at the center of the Munich discussions in the past couple of years. And the line that the Trump administration has taken in trying to resolve the Ukraine conflict following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, its apparent thrust to accept Russia's territorial encroachment on Ukraine. And to you, I absolutely, I understand, and we've had various versions of it already, your characterization of a clash between conservative and liberal values being, at the heart of what's going on in the West. But in this particular one, a security issue, one that involves international law, whether countries still respect those international laws laid down after the Second World War, do you think that that brings a new rift within the West? Ukraine, the US's position.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, I am.
I think that the Trump administration's position toward Ukraine is disgraceful. I think the effort to force Ukraine into a surrender deal with Putin is shameful. I think the effort that Putin and Trump are making to profit off the misery and death of the Ukrainian people is a historic error and corrupt to the nth degree. And so I believe Ukraine is fighting for our democracy and our values of freedom and civilization on the front lines, losing thousands of people and having their country destroyed by one man's mania to control them. And I think Trump either doesn't understand or could care less about that suffering. So that's what I think.
And so do you think he has destroyed the West, to go to our title?
He has betrayed the West. He's betrayed human values. He's betrayed the NATO Charter, the Atlantic Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A lot of what has been done before to try to make sense of how difficult it is to restrain people who want unaccountable power. And none of us in this room, including all of us on this panel, would choose to live under a regime that was so unaccountable that it could act with impunity the way that Putin does, except that's who Trump is modeling himself
I don't think we would be having this debate under that kind of regime, for sure. We will come back, I suspect, to the conservatism and liberalism clash within the West, but thank you for that. Peter, do you agree?
Well, first, I think you really don't like him.
That is absolutely true. But I really, not only do I not like him, I don't like him because of what he's doing to the United States and the world. And I think you should take a hard look at it if you think that there is something good that will come out of it.
Peter.
What I think